I had barely changed out of my blood-stained blouse when I pushed through the heavy door of Rosso, almost fleeing from the pounding rain that was turning the streets of Brooklyn into dark, swirling rivers. November had arrived with the kind of bitter vengeance that cut straight through bone, and I had just survived 12 torturous hours on shift at the emergency veterinary clinic, trying to save a black Labrador struck by a car at the corner of Atlantic Avenue. We lost him less than 20 minutes before my shift ended. The jeans and sweater I had thrown on in a hurry suddenly felt mismatched and meaningless, too ordinary for a night when nothing felt remotely okay. I only wanted a place with warm light, strong liquor, and no one asking why there was dried blood on my sleeves. Rosso was not a place I usually visited, but tonight it felt like the only refuge left open, tucked into a small corner of the street, with its amber glow and the quiet curl of jazz slipping through the fogged up windows. I stepped inside, my soaked shoes whispering against the dark wooden floor, leaving scattered trails of water behind me. The warmth and faint scent of smoldering wood eased the tight pull coiling up my spine. I chose a seat at the bar, far from wandering eyes, and signaled to the bartender without saying a word. A glass of whiskey mixed with hot chocolate appeared in front of me only minutes later, steam rising gently as if it could soothe the dull ache throbbing through my skull. I wrapped both hands around the glass, letting the heat seep into my fingers, my gaze drifting toward the rivulets of rain sliding down the window pane. The night was strangely quiet, and I almost believed I could sit here until the world outside dissolved, until the sound of the front bell cut through the stillness and 3 men walked in, carrying a burst of frigid air and a sudden tension so sharp I felt it prick against every inch of my skin. The man leading them was tall, sun-touched skin, his black hair neatly combed back with silver threading the temples. His eyes swept the room in a single practiced motion before locking onto me, and in that fleeting moment something like electricity shot straight down my spine. I bowed my head, pretending not to notice, but only a few minutes passed before slow, deliberate footsteps approached from behind, and when I turned, a firm hand closed around my wrist. "This scar, where did you get it?" His voice was low and rough, carrying a mixture of anger and bewilderment, so raw it seemed to tremble at the edges. I stared at him, stunned, and before I could react he lifted my arm, tugging my sweater sleeve back to see more clearly. The scar shaped like 2 interlocked letter Ms rested on the inside of my left wrist, faint but unmistakable to anyone who had ever seen it. I tried to pull away on instinct, but my body froze. His eyes bore into mine, gray and cold like steel pulled from fire. "Who are you? Who are you really?" Everything around me blurred. The jazz felt distant, echoing from somewhere far away. For a moment I was no longer a worn-out veterinarian running from a terrible day. I was a 12-year-old girl again in the St. Joseph orphanage, trembling as I held the hand of the only friend I had ever known, letting our blood mix on a razor blade as we promised never to forget each other. But Elena disappeared, and I had sworn never to tell anyone about the scar. Yet now this man, with eyes haunted by something deep and dark, spoke of it as if he had just seen a ghost rise from the past. If you're feeling every pulse of tension between me and Caleb in Rosso, when the past jolts back to life from a small scar, please subscribe to our channel, like, and share this video so we can bring more mysterious and emotional stories every day. And, where are you listening from? Leave a comment with your city or country, so I know how far this journey has reached across the world. I pulled my hand, back on instinct, but Caleb did not release me right away. His gaze remained locked on the scar as if it were whispering a truth I could not yet hear. His expression was not only shock but a deep mix of hurt and fury, as if my very presence had awakened a nightmare he had tried to bury. The air in the bar grew heavier, the laughter and chatter faded behind me, the bartender deliberately looked away, and the 2 men with Caleb stood by the door like guards who needed no orders. "I will ask one more time," he said slowly, his voice low and sharp like the edge of a cold blade. "Where did you get this scar?" I tried to steady my voice, though my heart beat so fiercely it felt ready to burst. I don't know what you mean. It's an old scar. I got it when I was a child." Caleb narrowed his eyes, his brows drawing together, as if reaching for a memory buried long ago. He let go of my wrist, but his gaze did not leave my face for a single second. "No one has that scar by accident. Not that shape. Not in that exact place." I swallowed hard, my hand trembling slightly. "I lived in the St. Joseph orphanage in Chicago. I was 12 that year. I didn't think it meant anything to anyone." Caleb froze. My words struck him like a lit match dropped into gasoline. St. Joseph? He repeated, as if he could not trust his own hearing. The entire room seemed to still. I glanced around. People had turned away, but I knew they were listening. Caleb sat down beside me without asking permission. His breath was heavy, his jaw tight as if he were holding something fragile inside. "What is your name?" he asked, his voice suddenly quieter, as if afraid of the answer. "Rachel Monroe." He closed his eyes, as though the name stirred something both sweet and unbearably painful. When he opened them, he held my gaze for a long, searching moment. "I once had a wife. She died 3 years ago, murdered during a robbery. She had a scar exactly, like this one. And she once told me about a little girl named Rachel from the St. Joseph orphanage." For a heartbeat, my heart seemed to stop. Sensation drained from my skin, leaving only the gentle tapping of rain against the window and a story that felt impossible. I shook my head, not because I doubted him, but because I could not accept that a severed thread from the past could stitch itself back together in such a strange way. "What was her name?" I whispered, barely recognizing my own voice. "Elena," Caleb said softly, his eyes shifting with a fragile tenderness. "Elena Russo." The room tilted. In an instant I saw her again, Elena with the brown hair and radiant smile, the girl who held my hand through nights of crying after a foster family returned me like damaged goods, the girl who touched a razor blade to my skin, letting our blood meet as she said that if we ever lost each other, the scar would lead us back. But I never imagined Elena would truly disappear. Or perhaps I never allowed myself to search for her. I looked at Caleb, and for the first time our eyes met without the distance of strangers. I saw the loss inside him, and I saw a truth rising between us, layer by fragile layer, like fog lifting under the bar's dim light. "What do you want from me?" I asked, unable to hide the tremor in my voice. Caleb held my gaze. "I want to know why you lived," and Elena did not. I did not know how to answer Caleb, because how could I possibly tell him that I too had only just learned that Elena was gone? The news had not even settled inside me before it was crushed beneath the weight of his questioning stare and the anger simmering beneath the calm facade he tried so hard to hold on to. I turned away, trying to escape his gaze, but it kept pulling me back toward a time I had spent my entire youth trying to forget. I remembered St. Joseph during those brutal Chicago winters, the walls cold with the smell of old paint, the watered-down meals, the endless nights spent curled beneath thin blankets. But I remembered Elena too. She was 2 years older than me, yet she shielded me like an older sister in every sense. Elena had a smile that warmed whatever space it touched. She was clever, quick-witted, and always found a way to stop my tears. We were 2 lost girls in a place no one dared to call home, and maybe that was why we clung to each other the way we did. On the day I was taken in by the foster family, I cried until I could not cry anymore. Elena stood at the doorway, holding my hand so tightly it hurt. She took a razor blade she had hidden inside a pencil case, drew a thin cut across both our wrists, shaping the interlocked letter Ms., and swore that wherever we went, if we ever found someone who bore that same mark, that person could be trusted. When the foster family returned me in less than 2 years, I did not go back to St. Joseph. I moved through different centers, temporary homes scattered, like dots on a map of survival, until I turned 18 and was allowed to live on my own. I never searched for Elena. Part of me was afraid, and part of me believed she had found a better life. I buried that chapter deep within myself, as though silence alone could make it cease to exist. But tonight, as Caleb looked at me with that haunted expression, everything rose to the surface. I drew in a long breath and began to speak. I told him about St. Joseph, about how the children disappeared quietly and no one ever asked. I told him about my roommates, the ones who played with me one morning and were simply gone the next. I told him about the night I snuck outside and saw a gray truck parked in the yard, a middle-aged man in a long coat accepting a child from the nun on duty. I remembered the look on Elena's face when I told her about it, how she said nothing but afterward began taking notes, questioning the younger kids, drawing crude maps of the rooms, writing down the names of those who vanished. I did not know then what she was doing, only thought it was some detective game inspired by the mystery novels she loved. But now I knew she had understood far more than I ever realized. When I finished my story, my voice was raw. Caleb did not speak for a long while. He leaned his elbows on the bar, fingers interlaced, his head bowed as though wrestling with some unbearable truth. At last he turned toward me, and something in his eyes had shifted. The suspicion was gone. In its place was astonishment. "Do you know," he said slowly, "that Elena spent the last 2 years of her life investigating a child trafficking network that once operated in Chicago? That she believed it all started with an old orphanage, but she never said its name?" My heart tightened sharply. Caleb looked at me, and this time there was no anger, only pleading. "You are the last piece, the only one left who knows what happened. I need you to help me finish what Elena could not." I did not know how long I sat in that amber hush of the bar, only that the air around me felt thick with everything Caleb had just revealed. Elena, the girl I once called my sister, the girl who held my hand through those endless St. Joseph nights, the girl I believed had stepped into a life far removed from ours, had instead walked into a danger I never imagined. Caleb pulled a photograph from the inside pocket of his coat and placed it before me. It was Elena. There was no mistaking her. Her hair was longer, her face older, but that smile, those eyes, I recognized them instantly. Beside her stood Caleb, younger, wearing a black suit, his eyes filled with an unmistakable love. "This was taken at our wedding," he whispered. I stared at the picture, my chest tightening. Elena had grown up, had loved, had married, had lived a life I never witnessed. "We met at a charity conference," Caleb said, his expression far away, as though peering into a memory too delicate to touch. She was a high school history teacher, but she had a deep passion for justice. She did not talk much about her childhood, only said she spent some time in an orphanage before being adopted. When she began volunteering with organizations for missing children, I thought it was compassion. But little by little, I realized it was obsession. He paused, his voice dropping into something quieter, heavier. She stopped sleeping at night. She read case files, wrote notes, drew diagrams. Sometimes I found her sitting in the dark, staring at papers I could not make sense of. When I asked, she would only say, "There are children no one remembers, but I remember. I have to remember for them." My chest ached. That was the Elena I knew, the Elena who could never walk away from someone who needed her. 3 years ago, Caleb continued, she told me she found an important lead, that everything traced back to a place called St. Joseph, but she never got the chance to say more before the vise. "Accident." I lifted my head, trying to steady my voice. "You mean she was killed?" Caleb nodded. "The police recorded it as a robbery. She was attacked while walking home alone after tutoring. Her purse was gone, her phone too. But I know it was not a robbery. It was too neat, too clean. Elena never walked alone at night. She always called me if she had to stay late. That night, I called her 10 times. No answer. When the police found her, even the necklace she always wore was missing." "A necklace?" I asked, a faint dread stirring. Caleb nodded. "Half of a heart. She said it was from her childhood. She told me that if one day she met the person who carried the other half, her past would finally come full circle." I could no longer breathe. My fingers rose to my neck, where a thin chain lay hidden beneath my sweater. The half-heart pendant, worn and faded with age, its engraved letters almost erased. I took it out and set it on the table. Caleb stared at it, then at me. He said nothing, but I saw his throat tighten, as though the truth he had feared, hoped, and doubted for so long had finally surfaced. "Elena never forgot you," he murmured, as if afraid his voice might break the fragile air between us. "And if you still carry that necklace, then maybe you are the reason she was killed." I went still, the floor beneath me tilting as though it might give way entirely. The scattered pieces of my past shifted into place, forming a picture I had never dared to imagine. Elena had gone back to the beginning, had lifted the veil on memories meant to stay buried, and she had paid for it with her life. And I, sitting here with a scar and half a heart she never abandoned, suddenly realized I had been carrying the last thread of her story all along. I was still sitting frozen when Caleb reached out and took the necklace, his eyes lingering on it, as though he were touching something sacred, something irreplaceable. He closed his fingers gently around the small pendant and then placed it back into my hand, with a care so deliberate it felt as if he feared he might break a piece of the soul of the woman he had lost. I did not know what to say, nor whether I should leave right then, but my body no longer obeyed reason. The moment I shifted to stand, Caleb looked directly at me, his expression far more severe and colder than before. You cannot go anywhere. I stiffened. What do you mean? You are carrying an important piece of the puzzle, and I cannot let you walk out before I know exactly how much you remember and whether someone may already be watching you. I frowned slightly. You think I had something to do with Elena's death? No, Caleb answered quickly. But someone else might think so. If Elena left anything for you, if you are holding evidence they want destroyed, then the fact that you are alive makes you a threat, and that means you are a target. A chill seeped into my palms. I had not imagined things could spiral this far. I had come here simply to forget a terrible shift at work, never expecting to pry open a door to my past that I had thought sealed forever. Caleb called one of the two men still standing near the entrance. He approached with a slight bow, waiting for orders. Ethan, Caleb said, his eyes locked on mine. Take her to the safe apartment on the east side. No one enters or leaves without my approval. I will follow shortly. Wait, I protested. I am not your prisoner. Caleb nodded. No, you are a witness, and you may be the last person Elena left anything to. If you walk out alone, I cannot guarantee your safety. Not right now. Ethan gestured politely for me to follow. I turned to Caleb, searching for any flicker of hesitation in his eyes, but all I saw was a cold certainty wrapped around an unhealed sorrow. Reluctantly, I followed Ethan out of the bar. Outside, the rain had eased, though the pavement still shimmered with streaks of headlights and scattered puddles. A black car waited by the curb, its interior warm and spotless enough to make me feel even more out of place. Ethan did not speak much, only explaining that I would be taken to a secure apartment under Caleb's protection, monitored with full security. I did not ask further, partly because exhaustion dulled my thoughts, partly because something long dormant within me had begun to stir. Fear. When the car stopped before a 3-story red brick building, I stepped inside in silence. The apartment was on the 2nd floor, small but complete with everything one could need. The large window overlooked a winter-stripped park, the bare trees bending under the cold wind. Ethan pointed to a single landline phone on a shelf. If you need anything, press 1. Only Caleb's people will answer. I nodded. He left after checking the locks and the security system. When I was alone, the room somehow felt larger. I sank onto the sofa, staring into empty space. Caleb's question kept echoing in my mind. If Elena had left me something, what was it, and why had she never reached out? Had she meant to keep me away from danger, or was she waiting for the right moment to pull me into this storm? I took the necklace from around my neck, studying the silver half-heart in my palm, and for the first time in years, I whispered Elena's name, as if calling her, as if begging her to tell me what to do next. I did not sleep at all that night. Even though the apartment Caleb arranged was quiet and secure, almost sealed away from the rest of the world, my mind refused to rest. I sat on the sofa beneath the soft glow of the lamp, my eyes fixed on the old notebook I pulled from my coat pocket, the one I had carried everywhere since college. On the first page was a rough sketch of the layout of St. Joseph. I had not believed I still remembered it so clearly, yet every room, every corridor seemed to rise up from memory as though I had walked them only yesterday. Around 7 the next morning, Caleb arrived. He knocked twice before opening the door with a code. He wore a gray turtleneck and a dark coat, his hair touched with traces of morning mist, his expression carrying the remnants of last night's shadows but steadied with new resolve. He brought 2 coffees and a paper bag of toasted bread. I accepted them without a word, and we sat across from each other at the small table by the window. I thought about everything all night. I began, my voice hoarse, about the missing kids at the orphanage. When I was still there, at least 6 children disappeared after dinner and never returned. At first I thought they had been adopted, but after a few times, I started to doubt it. They vanished without appearing in any transfer logs, no adoption papers, and the strange part was that the caretakers never mentioned them again, as if they had never existed at all. Caleb remained still, nodding slowly, absorbing every tiny time. Word. Do you remember any names? I remember 3. Lisa, 9 years old, Darren, around 10, and a younger girl named April, barely 7. She had light blonde hair and always carried a worn-out teddy bear. I paused, staring at nothing. I remember Elena asking the kids questions. She made it look like a detective game, but I knew it was more. She would check the nightly roster, and once she told me that some names had no birth certificates, no family details, just handwritten entries. She believed someone had forged the files. Caleb sat in silence for a moment, then set down his coffee. I have a contact at the FBI. Her name is Sarah Mitchell. She worked with Elena before, following suspicious child disappearance cases. After Elena died, Sarah kept looking into it but found nothing concrete. If you really have knowledge of those disappearances, I want you to speak with her. I nodded, though my thoughts were tangled. I was no investigator. I was just a veterinarian, someone who tried to forget the past because I believed burying it was the only way to survive. But Elena had done the opposite. She had turned back, followed the faintest traces into the dark, and it had claimed her life. If she had been brave enough to face it, then I had to be brave enough not to turn away. Caleb took a thin folder from his coat. Inside were copies of the notes Elena had left behind. Names of children, descriptions, dates of disappearance, and sometimes short fragments of her suspicions. One note stopped my breath. Scrawled in black ink, Rachel says she saw a truck in the yard. No lights. Someone carrying children inside. Must investigate. I read the line again and again, my throat tightening. Elena had written down what I told her. She believed me. She listened when no one else did. And because of those small truths, she never came home again. Caleb looked at me. We will see this through. But I need you to tell me everything you remember, even the smallest details. I curled my hands together. I will. I won't hide anything anymore. If there is even the smallest chance we can bring the truth to light, I will not let Elena die for nothing. Caleb nodded, his eyes sharpening with determination, and I knew that from that moment on, my life would never be the same. The next 3 days passed in a steady, simmering tension, as though Caleb and I were standing on the edge of something too vast to define, too dangerous to face directly. We met Sarah Mitchell in a small basement office in Brooklyn Heights, where she was working temporarily after leaving the FBI. Sarah was sharp, around 40, with quick eyes and a brisk voice. The moment I mentioned the names from my memory, she opened her laptop, typing rapidly, then turned the screen toward me. The files matched my recollections in unsettling ways. Some names disappeared from the system after a single entry. No medical records, no transfer documentation. Others reappeared in different states with new identities. We are dealing with an organized network, Sarah said, her gaze fixed on the screen, and whoever is behind it is not ordinary. This is not just human trafficking. This is identity laundering on a large scale, and St. Joseph is only one link in the chain. Caleb said nothing, but I sensed every muscle in his body tightening like drawn wire. That evening, he took me to the house he had once shared with Elena, in the northern part of Manhattan. The 2-story home sat in a quiet neighborhood, with a white fence and a garden turned brittle by winter. Everything inside the house felt sealed in a layer of memory, each object untouched, as though Elena had only stepped out that morning. Caleb led me to the second floor, to her office. On the wall hung a massive board covered with yellow and blue sticky notes, crisscrossed with red thread like a sprawling constellation. At the center was a photograph of a girl around 8 years, old with wide eyes and a faint, sorrowful smile. Sophia, Caleb said softly. She was one of the cases Elena was most haunted by. She disappeared in the year 2015. No reports, no records. Elena believed she was the sister of one of the children from St. Joseph, but she never found proof. I stepped closer, studying the notes. Some were handwritten, the strokes instantly familiar. My fingers brushed a note near the edge of the board, catching on a slight shift in the wall behind it. Instinctively, I pulled it aside and noticed a thin crack running vertically along the wood. I turned to Caleb, my pulse quickening. "Did you know this wall is hollow?" Caleb frowned, tapped the panel with his knuckle, and the hollow sound echoed back. Without hesitation, he retrieved tools, and within minutes the wood panel came off, revealing a hidden compartment the size of a small suitcase. Inside stood an old mechanical safe. Caleb stared at it, caught between dread and longing. "Only one person knew the code," he whispered, "and she is gone." My eyes drifted across the room, landing on the date scribbled beside Sophia's picture. A possibility struck me. Try the last 3 digits of Elena's birthday. Caleb hesitated, but leaned in. He turned the dial 3 times, slow and careful. A sharp click cut through the silence. The safe opened, and we peered inside. A laptop wrapped in moisture-proof cloth, a bundle of letters tied with string, and a nondescript black external drive. Caleb's hands trembled as he placed everything on the desk. I opened the laptop. It asked for a password, I tried Sophia's name, then the date she disappeared, but both failed. On the third attempt, I typed, Rachel. The screen flickered, then unlocked. Caleb stared at me in stunned disbelief. I exhaled softly, feeling something like destiny unfurl between us. Elena had not only left behind evidence, she had left behind trust, and now it was my turn to use that trust to step into the darkness she had never been able to return from. The laptop screen glowed to life in the kind of stillness where I could hear every tick of the wall clock marking the passing of time. The interface was simple, a handful of neatly arranged folders, all locked with passwords except for one lone video file sitting in the center of the screen, marked only by a date, December the 11th, 2020. I looked at Caleb, and the hope in his eyes clung desperately to whatever last trace of his wife might still remain. Without speaking, I clicked the video. The screen went black for a few seconds before Elena appeared. She was sitting in front of the camera in this very room, the same place where we now stood, the desk lamp casting light across half her face, accentuating the dark circles beneath her eyes and the strain carved into her expression. She wore a beige turtleneck sweater, her hair pulled back, and her eyes stared straight into the lens without a flicker of hesitation. Hello. If you are watching this, it means I did not get the chance to say the last thing I needed to say. I am not sure what will happen, but I know I am being watched. I feel it, every step behind me, every stare from a street corner, every faint sound in the middle of the night. If I disappear, believe that it was not an accident. Her voice was steady, but her hands tightened on the desk, and I could almost feel the fear coiled in her chest like a cornered animal. I have gone farther than I ever imagined. It began at St. Joseph, but it does not end there. There are powerful names behind this network, people with money, people with influence, people willing to do anything to protect their secrets. They are not just trafficking children. They create new identities, sell them to families overseas, and some are used for things you cannot even imagine. I tried to get close to one of them, but he knew who I was before I could say a word. If I survive, I will not stop. But if I die, I need someone else to continue. Elena paused, her eyes glistening, and for the first time her voice cracked. Rachel, if you are watching this, it means I was right to trust you. You are not just a memory. You are the final thread that ties me to the truth. You are the only one who witnessed what happened at the orphanage. You saw the truck, you told me, and I believed you. Do not blame yourself for your silence. I understand why you stepped back. But now, you can choose, not for revenge, but to end it. I saved all the evidence on the external drive. The password is the date you left the orphanage. If you find Sophia, tell her she was never abandoned. She was loved. She has always been loved. Beside me, Caleb lifted a hand to cover his mouth. He turned away, but not quickly enough to hide the single tear sliding down his cheek. My throat tightened. Elena lifted her hand toward the camera, instinctive, as though trying to reach whoever would be watching from the panified other side. Live on, whatever path you choose. But if you choose to step into this, be careful. Do not trust anyone too quickly. Never walk alone at night. And if you reach the end of this, come to my grave and tell me how it ends. The screen faded to black, no music, no closing image, only a silence that pierced straight through the heart. I remained there, motionless, staring at the empty space where Elena's face had been. Beside me, Caleb's hands were clenched so tightly the knuckles had gone white, and beneath the grief radiating from him, I could feel something else beginning to ignite. Not only sorrow, determination. There was no turning back now. Not after hearing those final words. Not after Elena placed all her hope in me. And in Sophia. I returned to the clinic the next morning, trying to act as though everything was normal, as though I was still Rachel Monroe, the veterinarian who had lost a Labrador earlier that week and simply needed to get back to her routine to regain balance. But beneath the clean white blouse was a quiet dread, like an underground current threatening to burst through at any moment. I reviewed the vaccination schedule, sorted some leftover files, chatted briefly with the head nurse, though I barely heard what she said. Elena's voice from the video echoed through my mind, every word scraping across my thoughts, reminding me I was standing in the middle of a dangerous game I no longer had the choice to walk away from. Near noon, I was alone in the back storage room organizing a new shipment of antibiotics when the hallway lights outside flickered. I frowned, stepped out to take a look, and noticed the reception area was empty. The usual noise had vanished strangely. I called out the name of the staff member on duty, but no one answered. A cold ripple ran down my spine. I had barely turned around when a dark figure emerged. He was tall, wearing a long dark coat and a cap pulled low. Before I could scream, he lunged, covering my mouth with a gloved hand, the other gripping my wrist and slamming me against the wall. I struggled, kicking wildly, but he was far stronger than I expected. His voice rumbled in my ear, low and dry. "You should not have touched Elena Russo's business." He pressed harder into my shoulder, pain shooting through me as the edges of my vision blurred. "You should have left the past alone." I could not scream, but I managed to reach behind me, grab the stainless steel antiseptic container, and swing it against his head. He staggered, just long enough for me to break free and sprint toward the front door, but just as my hand brushed the handle, a second man appeared, blocking my escape. Smaller than the first, but his gaze made my skin crawl. He smirked and pulled a folding knife from his jacket. "No one is coming to save you, Doctor. Everyone was told to leave early today." I backed up, my spine hitting the reception counter, my breath coming in harsh bursts, my hand still gripping the blood-stained steel container. They stepped closer. For a moment, I truly thought it was over, but the sound of shattering glass exploded through the room like thunder, and everything spun into chaos. Joseph, the bodyguard who had been with Caleb before, stormed in like a force of nature, gun raised, firing a warning shot that sent both attackers reeling. The larger man bolted toward the back exit, while the one with the knife was disarmed and pinned to the ground within seconds. I collapsed to the floor, hands trembling uncontrollably, staring into nothing as my mind struggled to understand I was still alive. Caleb arrived moments later, his face pale, panic flashing across his eyes for the first time since I met him. He rushed to me, kneeling, gripping my shoulders. "Rachel, are you hurt? Are you bleeding? Talk to me." I shook my head, my throat too dry to form anything more than a faint no. He turned to Joseph. "Who arranged the shifts today?" Joseph's voice was low, tense. I checked. Everything. But someone switched the schedule early this morning. They knew she would be here alone. Caleb's jaw tightened, his eyes turning to ice. "Call Sarah. Tell her to send people. And lock this one up until we get every name he has." He helped me to my feet, gentle but firm. "You cannot stay here. We are taking you somewhere safer." I followed him like someone moving through a dream. Behind us, Joseph was handcuffing the remaining attacker, dragging him out as distant sirens began to draw near. I did not look back. I could not. I knew I had stepped into the deepest part of the maze, and the puppeteer was finally starting to show his face. Elena had been right. It was not an accident. It was not paranoia. Someone wanted to silence every person who dared to step near the truth. But this time, I would not retreat. Night had begun to fall as Caleb drove the SUV out of the city, cutting through the quiet, snow-lined roads that led into the northern New York woods. I sat in the passenger seat, my hands tucked into the thick coat he had placed around me before we left the clinic. Everything had happened too quickly for panic to take shape. My body felt drained, but my mind was painfully alert. The headlights washed over the bare trees, lighting the thin veil of mist drifting across the road, and the silence around us settled like something alive, something watching. Caleb said little during the drive, only glancing at me from time to time to make sure I was still all right. His face was composed, but beneath that calm I sensed a taut vigilance, a constant readiness. We reached the cabin around 9 that night. The wooden house sat hidden among the pines, beside a small lake whose surface had begun to freeze, the only warmth coming from a soft lantern glow on the front porch. Caleb unlocked the door, lit the fireplace, then checked every lock, every window, every corner of the security system, while I stood quietly by the window, staring into the darkness, stretching beyond the glass. There was no phone signal, no traffic sounds, only the wind scraping against the walls and the snap of burning wood inside the stove. Once he was certain everything was safe, Caleb poured a cup of hot tea and set it in front of me before sitting in the chair across from mine. He leaned back, his eyes steady on me. "You do not have to say anything until you are ready, but I need to know whether you want to continue. I will not force you." I looked into his eyes deep, heavy, carrying the weight of things never spoken, and I nodded. "I will not stop. Not after what Elena left behind, and not after what happened today." Caleb released a breath, almost like relief. He stood, reached into his coat, and placed the hard drive from the safe onto the table. "Elena encrypted everything inside. Sarah is working with a specialist to decode it, but it will take time. Until then, I want you here. This cabin belongs to my family. No one knows about it except Joseph and Sarah." I nodded, grateful despite the unease tightening in my chest. I had never lived under this kind of protection before. The sense of being at the center of an invisible security perimeter made me feel both cared for and as though I had slipped into a life made entirely of shadows. That night, sleep refused to come. I curled up by the window, wrapped in a thin blanket, holding a cup of cold tea while staring at the stars hanging above the treetops. Caleb sat in a chair across the room, the fire casting warm light across his cheekbones, creating a strange tenderness in the middle of such bitter cold. He said nothing, but I knew he was keeping watch not only for safety, but because he too was wrestling with his own past. In that long silence, something soft began to weave itself between us. Not love, not the sudden, reckless kind, but a quiet tether built from trust forming grain by grain. The next morning, Caleb made coffee and set a cup beside me. "You can stay as long as you need, but if you feel ready, I will teach you how to defend yourself." I blinked at him, surprised. "You used to be special forces, didn't you?" Caleb let out a small, tired smile. "A long time ago. But if they come for you again, you cannot be unprepared. You need to know how to survive." And I knew then, in the depth of my bones, that something had shifted. I was no longer someone who had accidentally wandered into the dark. I was becoming part of the fight Elena had left behind, and this time, no one would have to face it alone. The days that followed passed like an odd, quiet pause in the middle of a gathering storm. Each morning, Caleb rose early, made coffee, and went outside to train. He began teaching me basic defensive skills, how to break out of a wrist hold, how to keep balance when shoved against a wall. At first my movements were clumsy, my limbs uncoordinated, but Caleb's patient gaze and gentle corrections, and the way he always kept just enough distance for comfort, slowly built the fragile sense of capability inside me. He never pushed. He simply remained a steady wall standing between me and the nightmares edging closer. Every evening, as the sun dipped behind the pines, we sat on the porch wrapped in thick blankets, watching the frozen lake catch the fading orange light. We began talking more not only about the case or the danger. I told him why I became a veterinarian, about the first cat I saved in my freshman year, about the loneliness of moving between foster homes and the constant fear of being discarded. Caleb did not interrupt. He listened as though every word mattered, as though I were something fragile deserving of quiet protection. When it was his turn, he told me about his years in the military, the strange dislocation that followed every return home, the way the world seemed out of sync with the places his mind still wandered. He told me about Elena, how she had stepped into his life like a beam of light, and how losing her had left an emptiness he did not know how to fill. But this time, when he spoke of her, I no longer saw only grief in his eyes. Something had softened, as if the memory of her no longer cut him open, but rested inside him like something he could finally bear. One late evening, after a simple dinner of pasta and red wine, Caleb played an old jazz record on the cabin's worn-out player. The air quieted, warm with candlelight and faint music. I was gathering the dishes when he stepped closer and held out his hand. "Would you like to dance?" I let out a small laugh, embarrassed. "I do not know how." Caleb tilted his head, his smile gentle as breath. "I am not good either, but we can learn together." I set the towel down and placed my hand in his. He guided me in slow turns across the small living room, the firelight flickering across the ceiling. His hand was warm, steady, a rhythm that made my feet feel safer than they ever had. Neither of us spoke, yet the silence was full of quickened heartbeats, of his soft grip each time I stumbled, of the way he looked at me as though I were the only thing in the world that felt real. When the music ended, I was still standing in his arms. Caleb did not let go right away. His hand rested gently along my back, and I leaned my forehead against his shoulder, feeling the steady warmth of his breath. For that moment, I was not thinking about the men chasing us, or about Elena, or about the fear coiled inside me. I was simply touching a kind of peace I had thought forever lost. Caleb lifted a hand to my cheek, his eyes searching but unhurried. "Are you all right?" I nodded, unable to find words. He leaned down and pressed a soft kiss to my forehead, a wordless gesture that melted something deep inside me. That night, I lay by the window as always, but for the first time in days, I drifted into sleep before the stars filled the sky. And I knew then that something had begun in that cabin, something born from quiet, from brokenness, from two hearts learning to beat. Again. Something gentle enough to heal. The message from Sarah arrived on an icy morning while I was rinsing mugs in the cabin's kitchen, my hands still scented with coffee and cinnamon. Caleb was tending the fireplace, his sweater draped loosely over his shoulders, his hair a little disheveled from the early wind. I opened my phone, my eyes locking on the short line of text that made my heart pound harder than any nightmare had before. Confirmed Sophia's location. Vermont. Current name, Lily Carson. Adopted in the year 2016. Documents falsified. Family now living in the town of Middlebury. I immediately handed the screen to Caleb. He skimmed the message, his expression sharpening, his lips pressing into a hard line. After a brief, heavy silence, he lifted his gaze. We have to go. Sophia was no longer just a name scribbled on a page. She was the final thread connecting Elena to a buried past, and perhaps the key to bringing everything into the light. We left the Donner Amalin cabin that very afternoon. Snow had begun to fall in thin, drifting flakes as the SUV wound its way down the mountain roads. Caleb kept his eyes fixed on the asphalt, while I held tightly to the folder Sarah had sent inside were copies of adoption papers, school photos, and a confidential DNA report matched against the strand of Elena's hair Caleb had kept preserved in an old album. Every result aligned. Sophia was indeed Elena's little sister, the child she had searched for until her last breath. Middlebury was a small town tucked along the side of a mountain, with old wooden houses mingling with cozy cafes and antique shops. It looked so peaceful it almost felt unreal. We rented a small room near the center of town, spending the night there before visiting the address listed in the file. Caleb scanned the neighborhood with habitual caution, noting license plates and watching for anything that felt out of place. The next morning, we stepped onto the porch of a white house framed by climbing rose vines and a wooden wind chime that clacked softly in the breeze. A middle-aged woman opened the door, her silver hair tied neatly back, her eyes sharp behind her glasses. She introduced herself as Mary Carson, Lily's adoptive mother. When I asked if I could meet the girl, she looked surprised but not suspicious. She stepped inside, leaving us waiting in silence. A few minutes later, a young girl around 12 appeared in the doorway. Light brown hair braided on both sides, wide, wary eyes. My heart tightened. I did not need DNA evidence. I knew instantly she was Sophia, not only because of her uncanny resemblance to Elena, but because something inside me stirred with a strange familiarity, as if Elena's memory had stepped quietly into the room through this child. I bent down slightly and smiled. Hello, Lily. My name is Rachel. I used to know someone named Elena Russo. The girl blinked. Who is that? I slipped a photo from my coat pocket. Someone who loved you very much. She was your sister. Mary froze at the words. Caleb stepped forward, speaking gently to reassure her, while I handed Sophia the childhood picture of Elena and a short clip from her final video message. The girl watched the screen without blinking, her eyes filling, her breath trembling. When the video ended, none of us spoke. Then Sophia turned toward me, her voice soft but steady. Was she really my sister? I nodded, my throat tightening. Yes. She searched for you until the end, and she wanted you to know you were always loved. Sophia stepped closer, her small hands gripping mine with surprising strength. I dreamed of her for years. Every time I was sad, there was always a woman in my dreams who sat beside me, who held me. I never saw her face clearly, but I knew she was not my adoptive mother. I thought I made her up, but she was real. Caleb looked at me with something like awe, something like gratitude. I squeezed the girl's hands, feeling the quick, frightened rhythm of her heartbeat. Somehow, Elena had never let her sister drift too far. She had left just enough behind for Sophia to be found, and now, none of us had to continue alone. We stayed in the Carson living room until late afternoon, the air warming between us as truth closed the distance that years had carved. Mary listened to everything without interrupting, shock flickering across her features when she learned Lily's true name was Sophia, and that her past had been hidden within a web of lies. But instead of resisting or denying it, she held Sophia's hand tightly, her eyes full of remorse. I did not know. I truly did not know. I adopted her through an agency in New Jersey. Every document appeared legitimate. If I had known, I would have tried to find her family. Caleb nodded, his voice low but not accusatory. We believe you. What matters now is that Sophia knows the truth and decides for herself what she wants to do. Sophia had been quiet through the exchange, her gaze, fixed on the photo of the grown Elena lying on the coffee table. I could see the storm of questions in her eyes, the confusion of a childhood that suddenly had a name, a shape, a history. I moved closer, kneeling so we were face to face. "Sophia, would you like to come to New York with me for a little while? We can visit the places Elena lived. I can take you to her grave. It may be difficult, but I believe you are strong enough." She did not answer at once. She looked at me, then at Mary. The woman's face crumpled with conflict, but she nodded after a hesitant pause. "If you want to go, I will not stop you. I only want you safe and happy." Sophia looked back at me, and this time there was no uncertainty. "I want to know her. I want to meet her in the only way I can." We left Middlebury the next morning. Mary helped pack a few of Sophia's belongings and hugged her tightly, tears slipping down her cheeks as she whispered goodbye. During the long drive back, Sophia did not sleep. She sat, between Caleb and me, occasionally asking about Elena, what she liked to eat, what music she listened to, where she went to school. I answered each question slowly, carefully, as if stitching together the portrait of a sister she had never known but had always felt. Caleb spoke less, but his eyes softened whenever Sophia laughed at some clumsy childhood memory of Elena's. By the time we reached the outskirts of New York, the sun had settled low in the west, painting the sky with a pale, fading orange. We took Sophia back to the cabin to rest, planning to visit Elena's grave the following morning. The next day was crisp, the air cool and still. Sophia gripped my hand as we walked along the stone path winding through the small cemetery behind an old church. Caleb walked ahead of us, carrying a bouquet of white tulips he had picked up early that morning. Elena's grave sat beneath an ancient oak tree, the headstone simple, etched with quiet grace. Elena Russo, beloved, sister, a seeker, who never surrendered the truth. Sophia released my hand and stepped forward. She knelt, placing her palm gently against the stone, as if touching something that was both foreign and deeply familiar. "Elena, it is Sophia. I am sorry I came late, but I am here now, and I will not let you be alone again." Her voice was small but unwavering. My throat tightened. Caleb stood a few steps behind us, his hands in his coat pockets, his gaze lifted toward the soft gray sky. None of us spoke. We did not need to. The moment spoke for itself. Elena had finally been reunited with the one she searched for, and Sophia, at last, had found a place to belong. As we left the cemetery, there was no longer guilt or raw grief twisting inside me, but a colder, clearer sense of purpose. Elena had done her part, Sophia had been found, and now it was my turn, Caleb's turn, and Sarah's turn to finish what she began. The encrypted hard drive had finally been decoded after nearly 1 full week of relentless work from Sarah and her special technical team. Inside was a detailed list of every person tied to the trafficking network, along with documents proving the laundering of false identities through sham charitable organizations. And at the center of it all, rising above every other name, was one that felt like a blow to the chest: Victor Moretti, a businessman, a longtime donor to children's charities, and once a close friend of Caleb's father. Caleb did not look surprised. He simply stared at the photo of Victor in a polished black suit at a gala, his eyes darkening like a storm gathering on the horizon. He was always right there, and Elena died because she stepped too close. Sarah devised an elaborate, public trap. Victor was scheduled to host a major charity gala at the Plaza Hotel, drawing in business leaders, politicians, and the press. It was the perfect opportunity, the place he would feel safest, confident he remained untouchable. The plan had 3 layers. Sarah and the FBI would place agents undercover as security and staff. I would attend as an honored guest, accompanying Caleb under the name Rachel Monroe, a veterinarian supposedly sponsored by one of Victor's animal rescue funds. We would approach him, give him subtle signs that might provoke recognition, and if he reacted as predicted, that would be our first crack in the wall. The gala took place on a weekend evening. I wore a simple, long black dress, elegant but understated, with the scar on my arm left exposed, just as Sarah instructed. Caleb wore a dark suit, his expression so cold and distant that no one dared approach unless they already knew him. We entered the ballroom slowly, crystal chandeliers scattering light across my face, and almost instantly Victor's eyes found me from across the room. In that moment, his features froze, his gaze locked on the scar along my arm, and I felt his breath hitch even from a distance. He set down his glass, weaving through the crowd toward. I tightened my grip on Caleb's hand, my palm damp with sweat, but I did not lower my eyes or step back. Victor stopped in front of me, staring openly at the scar before lifting his gaze to my face. "Who told you?" I tilted my head, keeping my voice even. "Told me what, Mr. Moretti? I'm only attending the gala. I heard you were the main sponsor." He swallowed, struggling to regain composure. Caleb stepped forward, his voice like a blade. "Do you remember, Victor? The night Elena died, do you remember what you told me? That some things are better left buried." Victor's face drained of color, then flushed with shock. He turned to walk away, but 2 FBI agents in plain clothes stepped in from both sides, efficient and quiet, locking his arms before he could utter another word. Sarah appeared, presenting the arrest warrant. Victor shouted, threatened lawsuits, demanded calls, but everything unraveled beneath him. The evidence in the hard drive, the words he had spoken at the gala, the list of witnesses ready to testify, every piece had been arranged so that escape was impossible. As he was led past me, his eyes flicked toward mine one last time, stripped of arrogance and menace, leaving only naked fear. I stood still, unblinking. "Elena, we did it, and this time, we were not too late." The moment Victor was taken into custody, Sarah moved without hesitation. A massive raid against the network's headquarters launched that very night, built on the data Elena had preserved and the first fragments Victor yielded under intense pressure. Caleb and I were not allowed on the ground, but Sarah permitted us to follow the entire operation from a temporary command center inside the FBI office in Manhattan. On the large screen before us, satellite maps bloomed with red markers, each one a location being secured and shut down. At least 5 houses were raided within the first 4 hours, each disguised behind the facade of a children's assistance center or a nonprofit. Headquarters. The tactical teams split into 3 major units targeting the network's financial channels, personnel routes, and operational hubs. One by one, the faces Elena had documented in her videos and notes appeared on the screen as agents confirmed their identities and tracked their movements. I watched each photo come to life, no longer shadows, but people being dragged from hiding. People who had once worn the coat of a healer, who had been praised for their philanthropy, now handcuffed and shoved into vans under harsh lights and screaming sirens. Among them was someone I never expected to see, the former director of St. Joseph. He was older than I remembered, but his eyes still carried the same cold emptiness I had felt in those hallways long ago. Sophia sat beside me, her grip tight around my wrist. She did not cry, but held on so hard her nails cut into my skin. "You deserve to see this," I whispered. "You deserve to watch them pay." When the raid reached its final phase, Sarah entered the room, her hair tousled and her coat dusted with debris, her eyes fierce with exhaustion and determination. She nodded at Caleb, then turned to me. "We have more than 20 individuals in custody, 14 children recovered from the underground facilities, including 3 under 5. They're being transported to emergency care centers now, with full psychological support. Victor is being interrogated in the special unit. He's talking, but holding back. We believe he wasn't the top." I felt my breath catch. So there was still another layer behind him. Sarah nodded, possibly the international coordinator of the entire network. "But thanks to what Elena left, we have a real chance, our first real chance to expose everything." She stepped closer to Caleb. "You should rest a few hours. It's under control." Caleb stood there, his eyes sharp but his forehead damp with sweat. He nodded slowly, then turned to me. "Will you come with me?" I glanced at Sophia. She gave a small nod. "Go," she whispered. "I'll stay with Sarah. I'm okay." Caleb and I left the command center sometime after 3 in the morning. Outside, the city still glowed as though unaware a piece of its own darkness had been peeled open. We drove in silence. At the temporary apartment Caleb was using, he set down his coat and placed his gun on the shelf before sinking onto the sofa with a long, heavy exhale, as if releasing a weight he had carried for years. I stepped closer, laying my hand gently on his shoulder. "You don't have to be strong all the time, Caleb." He lifted his eyes to mine, and for the first time, I saw something new in them. Relief. A part of him had been unshackled. He took my hand, drawing me down beside him, resting his forehead against my shoulder in a wordless surrender. We had gone too far to turn back. But for the first time, I felt that I was no longer living simply to survive. I was living to do what was right. And somewhere, I knew Elena was smiling, because in the end, she had not fought in vain. We sat together in silence beneath the dim lights of the apartment. The night sky outside the window washed in a pale gray with no stars, only the city's glow reflecting off the low clouds. Caleb had not moved from my shoulder, his breath steady, though I could feel his heartbeat racing beneath the quiet composure he tried to hold on to. His hand rested lightly over mine, not gripping but not letting go either, as if the smallest shift might cause him to break apart. I said nothing, letting the stillness between us speak for itself, a stillness that was not heavy but gentle, as though it had waited a long time to exist. When Caleb finally lifted his head, his eyes met mine at a distance, close enough for me to see my own shadow reflected in his pupils. "Rachel," he began, his voice low and rough as if drawn from the deepest part of him. "I am not sure I should say this, but I cannot keep it inside anymore." I held his gaze, waiting, not interrupting. He swallowed hard before continuing. "From the moment you walked into the bar that night, drenched in rain, your eyes exhausted yet still full of light, I felt something shift. At first, I thought it was Elena, the scar, the unfinished past. But the longer you stayed, the more I realized you were simply you. You were not a replacement. You were not someone filling a void. You made me want to live again, not just exist." My heart tightened. I had waited so long to hear words like that, not sweet nothings tossed carelessly into the air, but something spoken by a man who had lost, who had suffered, and who chose to trust again. I placed my hand against his chest where his heart beat fast beneath the thin fabric of his shirt. "I did not intend to love you either, Caleb. I came here to uncover the truth, to answer questions no one dared ask for so many years. But then you kept showing up not as a savior, but as someone who saw me entirely, even when I was not certain I still existed whole." Caleb smiled, a soft breath of a smile that brought light to the lines of a face shaped by years of hardship. He brushed a strand of hair away from my cheek, his fingers trembling not from fear but from the fragile courage of touching something he thought he no longer deserved. "You know, I once believed I would never love again, Elena. She took most of my heart with her. But you did not try to fill that emptiness. You created a new place, one where I could simply be myself, without the weight, without the armor, without the past." I nodded as tears slipped down my face before I could stop them. In the quiet glow of the night, Caleb leaned in and kissed me slowly, gently, with no urgency, only the connection of two souls once torn apart, finding one another in an unexpected calm. The kiss was not just an admission, but a promise, that whatever waited ahead, we would not turn away from each other. That love could be born in the darkest corners and still become light. When he pulled back, he rested his forehead against mine. "Wherever this goes, however brutal the road ahead may be, I want you to know one thing. I love you, Rachel." I smiled, my eyes still wet but my heart clearer than it had ever been. "I love you too, Caleb. Not because you are strong, not because you protected me, but because when I am near you, I do not feel the need to hide any part of myself. And for the first time in my life, I feel worthy of being loved." We sat like that, two people who had once lost everything, now finding one another not to fill a void but to begin a new chapter, one no longer bound by the past, one where love did not need to hide behind wounds. The trial of Victor Moretti and his accomplices took place on an early spring morning, when the last of the snow had melted and the air carried the damp scent of earth and the fragile hope of beginnings. Caleb, Sophia, and I arrived early, seated together in the public gallery. The courtroom overflowed with people, reporters lining the aisles, and the air heavy with anticipation, as though the entire city was holding its breath. Victor entered in a pale gray suit, his face drained of color, stripped of the authority he once carried like a second skin. His hands were cuffed, his eyes darting away from every stare. His lawyers flanked him, but none of them could change the undeniable weight of the evidence before the court. Sarah stood before the jury, her voice sharp and clear, each word slicing through the false moral facade the trafficking network had built around itself for so many years. The figures she recited left the room frozen. 19 missing children over the course of a decade, 7 fraudulent charities, millions of dollars laundered through foundations bearing Victor's signature. But what silenced the room completely was the final video of Elena, played with Caleb's and my consent. She appeared on the screen like a testimony carried from the other side of time, her voice trembling slightly but her eyes fierce, recounting what she had discovered, and what she risked everything to preserve. Sophia's fingers tightened around mine as the video ended. The courtroom seemed to exhale in one long, collective breath, several people bowing their heads, some wiping their eyes. Victor stared at the floor, his shoulders shaking. Whether from anger, shame, or fear, it was impossible to tell, and irrelevant now. The truth had been spoken, clearly, publicly, and beyond denial. When the judge read the verdict, I held my breath. Victor Moretti was sentenced to 25 years in federal prison without parole for organizing and directing an international human trafficking network. His accomplices each received sentences ranging from 10 to 20 years. But to me, the sentence was more than numbers. It was the world's acknowledgement that Elena's sacrifice had not been in vain, that her memory had become living evidence, guiding justice to where it belonged. After the trial, we stepped out into the soft spring sunlight. Caleb held my hand, and Sophia walked between us, her eyes bright despite her fatigue. "Do you feel lighter?" I asked gently. She nodded. "I feel like Elena is smiling. And I think, for the first time in a very long time, I am too." Caleb squeezed my hand, his gaze fixed ahead, toward a future no longer haunted by shadows, but paved with something real, steady, and full of light. We had lost much to reach this point, but in the end, justice had prevailed. And that was the beginning of everything that would follow. A few months after the trial, summer returned to New York with sudden showers and bright sunlight stretching across every street. The city seemed lighter, not just because of the weather, but because new beginnings were quietly taking root. I reopened the small veterinary clinic in Brooklyn, the place where I had first started before life swept me into an unpredictable storm. But this time, everything felt different. On the sign outside, beneath my name, a new line had been carved, for the voices that were never heard. It was a reminder to myself each day of why I began and why I continued. The clinic was partly funded by a new foundation Caleb established called the Russo Foundation, created in memory of Elena and dedicated to supporting survivors of abuse or disappearance. It offered not only temporary shelter but also legal and psychological support, especially for children. Caleb no longer served in special operations, but he still worked with the FBI as a consultant, lending his experience to cases involving underground networks. He had found a new purpose rising from old wounds, and instead of living in the shadow of his past, he chose to turn it into a guiding light for others. Sophia moved in with us in the small 2-story home in Park Slope. She grew more each day, transforming from a child haunted by unanswered questions into a young woman with steady eyes and a brave heart. She received therapy from a psychologist Sarah recommended and began keeping a journal, each page filled with thoughts so profound they left me wordless. Once, she let me read a few entries, and one line stayed with me forever. "I once thought I was the shadow of someone who died, but now I know I am the flame she left behind." Sarah often joined us for dinner, and she and Caleb formed a unique friendship, forged from shared battlefields and the quiet understanding born from long investigations. Once she joked that if it were not for me, she would have married Caleb, and he only laughed, his eyes turning toward me with unmistakable warmth. We did not rush into marriage or bind ourselves with distant promises. Our love needed no proof. It lived in the small things, in the way Caleb made coffee exactly how I liked it, or how I always kept a warm towel by the door for him when he came home late. We lived honestly, imperfectly, but fully. One Friday evening, I sat on the porch with Sophia, watching her water the Sophia lavender pots she had just planted. She turned to me and asked if anyone would ever want to hear her story someday. I squeezed her hand gently. "Many people will want to hear it, Sophia, because your story is hope, a reminder that even the most forgotten children can find their own path." She smiled, the sun catching her soft brown hair, and I realized it was the first time she was truly smiling from her soul. That night, I lay beside Caleb on the long lounge chair on the balcony, the two of us wrapped in a thin blanket, our eyes turned to a cloudless night sky. He reached for my hand, silent as always, but I could hear the unspoken words in the steady rhythm of his breath. I leaned in and whispered, "I never thought, after everything, that I would have something this beautiful." Caleb let out a soft laugh and pressed a gentle kiss to my forehead. "Because you deserve it, Rachel. You, Sophia, Elena, all the people who once believed they were only the scars of their past. New life does not come because we forget what happened, but because we choose to walk forward with it." And in the quiet peace of that night, I knew we had survived. Not just survived, but begun a new chapter where love, justice, and trust were no longer distant dreams. They were the pulse of our days, the blood in our veins, the breath of every new morning. On a gentle autumn morning, when golden leaves began to fall across the stone paths, Caleb, Sophia, and I returned to the small cemetery where Elena rested. The air was cool but comforting, carrying the scent of dry grass and aged wood on every passing breeze. We said little along the way, choosing instead to listen to the world around us, as though each step carried a quiet offering of gratitude. Elena's stone lay beneath the old oak tree, covered with a thin layer of moss, yet still bearing its inscription as clearly as the first day. Sophia knelt and placed a bouquet of white tulips on the grave, her hands no longer trembling as they had on. Her first visit, she whispered something soft enough for the wind to carry away, but strong enough to settle peace in her heart. Caleb stood behind her, his eyes fixed on the carved words, while I held his hand, feeling the warmth of a man who had endured so much loss, yet still chose to love and to live with kindness. It was not a grand or overwhelming ceremony, but a gentle farewell, a moment not only to remember but to release the pain that had followed us for so long. Because we knew Elena was not just a name on a stone. She was part of the journey that brought everything back into alignment. She was the reason we found each other, found ourselves, and built a life stronger than anything that tried to break us. As we left the cemetery, I looked back one last time, and in that moment, I understood that life is never a simple straight line. It is full of bends, wounds, and losses that cannot be undone, but it is those very things that give life its true meaning. It is learning to love again after being broken, to trust again after betrayal, to live again after believing all was lost. The story of Rachel, Caleb, Elena, and Sophia is not only a journey of uncovering secrets or bringing the wicked to light, it is a story of forgiveness, of courage, and above all, of the enduring belief that no matter how dark the past may be, the future can be rewritten with love and kindness. We share this story not merely to recount a moving journey, but to remind anyone listening that you are never alone in your fight. You may be carrying a pain you cannot yet name, or living with a memory you wish you could erase. But remember, there is always hope ahead, always a light at the end of the path, and you are worthy of a fuller life. What do you think of this story? Did it touch a memory or a feeling within you? Have you ever lived through a moment that made you look back and change the way you chose to live? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We truly want to hear the stories that come from your heart. If this story meant something to you, please like, share, and do not forget to subscribe to our channel so you can continue walking with us through moving and inspiring stories each day. Your support is the greatest encouragement helping us spread goodness to the community. Goodbye for now, and we will see you again in the next video with a new story, honest and deeply human. Wishing you good health, a peaceful life, and a warm heart amid the rush of the world. Farewell. Until next time.